I am so excited to welcome you into the conversation that I have with Dr. Andrea Smith in this week's episode. This is a conversation that's been long overdue, and Dr. Andrea and I have covered tons of subjects in our conversation, practitioner to practitioner, and now we're going to start sharing them with you. This week, Dr. Andrea and I explore her own journey in women's health and as a practitioner, what she realized during her journey about what she didn't really know and how assembling a healthcare team can be incredibly valuable for people in general, as well as many other awesome topics. Dr. Andrea is such a sweet personality, and I can't wait for you to hear all of the things that we cover as we have our conversation this week. Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an Eastern medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your menstrual health, offering period solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. Welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. This conversation is long overdue. I have had the privilege of having many very wonderful in-depth conversations about the healthcare picture with Dr. Andrea Smith, and I'm so excited to have her on the show today. Welcome, Dr. Andrea.
Hi, how are you?
This conversation is one that we have talked about and we've had to reschedule a couple of times, but every time I'm in the same space with Dr. Andrea, we always have all kinds of rich things to talk about. So you'll probably see her as a frequent flyer on the program because there are lots of conversations that I feel you all need to hear that she and I have had together as practitioners. So how about you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Andrea Smith. I am a neurologically based chiropractor focusing on the stress response in my patients' bodies. So I work very deeply with how we are coming in and out of sympathetic and parasympathetic and what that's doing to our overall system, how that's showing up for us. And I always say I don't have a certain population that I work with. I work womb to tomb. So I work with everybody. I'm also trained in BGI, biogeometric integration chiropractic, working on the tensional patterns within the body throughout the sacred geometry. So that's sort of where I land in chiropractic.
Well, and this is one of the many reasons that not only do I feel like I connect on such a meaningful level with Dr. Andrea, because I pull some of that geometry into my work in acutonics as well, but we've had some really great conversations about body literacy awareness in general and both of our different lenses because of our different training backgrounds and the commonalities that we see in terms of what our clients are struggling with, how we show up to support them. And I love the synergy that we've had as practitioners being able to share knowledge with one another that we can then take back into our practices and share with our clients. So tell me a little bit about your journey in this whole process.
Yeah. So when Adrienne and I got first, we're talking about what are we going to talk about? Because we have a million topics to talk about as far as like women's health and how to support that and what it looks like and what it doesn't look like and what it needs to look like. We just kind of came to the conclusion about first sharing sort of my story as a practitioner who has studied the body extensively. I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know. And I think that's powerful. Being a practitioner, you need to know what you don't know. It's not even humbling yourself. You need to be able to ask the other experts out there for guidance on how to navigate that. So for me, it was a very personal journey. I knew about Adrienne in the periphery of like all the practitioners within our area. And I knew I needed to be reaching out to her, but it took me almost a year to finally reach out to her. And it was actually during the beginning of COVID. And I was like, oh, I actually have some slowdown time. This is lovely. Not lovely what was going on in the world, but lovely for me to have a little slowdown. And I reached out to her because I was having painful cycles, and I'm very open about everything. So I was having painful cycles. I was having short, erratic cycles, coming every, between 22 and 26 days. And I never knew when it was going to come sometimes. And I knew that I was under a load of stress that was definitely affecting it. And I knew how to handle it from my point of view. I was getting adjusted. I was doing my acupuncture. I was doing all the good things. I'm very active. I eat a fairly healthy diet, but there was a missing piece. And that's when I reached out to Adrienne because I was like, what is this steaming stuff all about? Like, what is happening here? And so I reached out to her. And what I loved about Adrienne was like, she didn't just talk about what was happening with me in that moment. We definitely delved into that. But she was like, what has it been like for you since you became a bleeding person? And I was like, oh my God, like, let's dive into that. Like, very heavy cycles. I, was put on the birth control pill at, 14, 15 years old, which, definitely affected my mental health. Like, it definitely sent me into a fight or flight state for the 3-4 years I was on it. And only when I came off of it did I realize how truly intense it was affecting me and not really controlling the symptoms that it was supposed to be controlling. So that was kind of interesting for me when you were asking me those questions, like to look back and actually think about that. Because I don't think I thought about that until you and I had to sit down and I had to delve into that a little bit. And then with Adrienne just describing like why the things were happening in my body, like talking about stagnation and liver this and spleen this. And I was like, wait, what? Huh? Like, what are you talking about? Like, what do those have to do with it? And then just working with you on the steaming was a huge part. And the steaming's like also a beautiful, like, parasympathetic stimulator and so good for your body. But like also you were talking to me about certain things I should be eating at certain parts of my cycle and herbs that may be helping to support. And also that beautiful piece about just the overall mental health. Like, where was I? Like, was I taking too much on? Was I not setting good boundaries? And you showed how that affected me on a physical level as far as my cycles went. So, being a practitioner and thinking you know a lot and being like, wow, I don't know anything about my cycle from that aspect was really eye-opening for me. And then I just wanted to share all of your information with everybody. So definitely like we've co-managed patients together, which has been really beautiful because there's a certain point where I can get people to, and then I'm like, I think Adrienne needs to come in here and we need to be working in tandem and just to support and just totally resource that patient in every way that we can. And then just still, I continue to work with you. You're still a practitioner that I personally work with. And I think that says a lot when a practitioner like puts their stamp on somebody, like, I'm going to work with you.
Yeah.
To me, that really means a lot. Like when I take a recommendation from you for any other practitioners, I know that that's coming from a place of personal experience for you. So that's kind of my story with all of this.
Well, and I think there's so many really powerful kernels that I kind of want to pull out of that. I think first and foremost is you're so accomplished in your area of expertise. And I go to you for that knowledge as well, right?
Mhm.
And yet you're like, holy, I did not realize what I didn't know. And
Mhm.
I think that that is important to mention because collectively, we as women really have not been taught a lot about our body. And even with the level of expertise that you have, I've had acupuncturists go, wow, what you know wasn't taught to me in acupuncture school. And, so I've worked with practitioners like you and others in this health and wellness field that are like, wow, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Mhm.
And I think that that's really powerful because it shows really where we've had a fall down in our educational system in terms of being able to empower women to care for their bodies in meaningful ways. And the other part that you had mentioned that I really loved was the fact that, we did go back in time in the conversation with, so what happened in the early stages? What's happened since then? And what are you dealing with now? Because a lot of times things happen slowly. And how many of us, like, raise your hand if you're listening to this, like, how many of us have that put on birth control at 14 or 15 narrative, right? To quote unquote control or regulate. I did a podcast a few episodes ago. It's in season 3, so go check it out if you didn't have a chance to listen to it. But it's about how birth control, it's myth busting, and that birth control doesn't regulate your cycle and why that is. Right. So many of us use that turn of phrase because that is what our practitioners told us when we were prescribed it in the first place. Little did we know what it's going to do. And one of the things that I love that Dr. Andrea felt comfortable enough to share is the fact that it did affect her mood. It disrupts our moods. And because it comes on slowly, we don't realize just how disruptive it is until we have the absence of it. And it's like, whoa, this really affected my energy level. This affected my weight. This affected my mood. Like, this really had a much bigger impact than I realized. But because it came on so slowly, we don't even realize it's happening until we finally come off of it.
Yeah. It's coming off of a drug. It's that process and then really coming out into the light. And, when you're 14 to 19, when I finally came off of it, it's this large period of your life where like you want to be enjoying that. Like it's your last kind of hurrahs like a kid. It's your last, like, it's coming into that adulthood. It should be this like beautiful, lovely time. But for me, it was filled. I mean, not that there weren't great times. I had a beautiful life. It was amazing. But like, I also had intense depressive periods, intense anger periods. And I couldn't explain to people why I felt these outbursts, like why I felt so. It was nothing I could put my finger on. It was nothing specific that was like, was a trigger for me. I just felt like I was almost out of control in my own body. And I'm not saying like, I guess I should put a disclaimer on this, like, doesn't mean it's going to happen to everybody, but it happens to enough of us that I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. And I feel like we're not talking about it. You talk about it, you and I talk about it, we shout it from the rooftops. But I also feel like as little girls, 14, 15, I see 14, 15-year-olds now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so young. Like, oh my gosh. And, we're taught, oh, we got our periods. We're taught how to use a tampon, use a pad. And then that's kind of the end of the conversation. Like, you got to know how to stop this. You got to know how to hide it. And then, oh, maybe we'll put you on birth control because you have some cramps or like you're not feeling too good. And we're going to regulate your cycle because your cycles are off. And then that's it. It should be like, it's not celebrated. There's no ceremony created around it anymore where it used to be. And then that's it. That's the only conversation we have. We don't talk about how we're bleeding. Like, are we clotting? Are we not clotting? Are we starting on day 27, 28? Are we doing? Never is that a conversation unless it's to treat the symptom. And then that's when the conversation comes up. But yeah, so I felt like, it wasn't anything like we talked about. My friends didn't really talk about it. Like we just had our periods. Like that was it. So that's where like I wish health classes in school, when they talk about like the developmental process or they're talking about the periods or they're talking about this, that they're talking about this in a positive way, or they're giving education on like what this could look like for you instead of what it is looking like for you. So
yeah, how many times have I been into a practitioner's office as somebody who's struggled with endometriosis over the years, and they're like, oh, what does your cycle look like? And I would describe it. And they'd be like, oh, well, if that's what's happening every month, then that's what's normal for you. Like there was, even with practitioners, yes, she's covering her face for anybody who is not seeing this in a video, because that was exactly and I love it because it's true. Like there's a lot of people that hear that. I have people who come in postpartum, right? And their cycle has just returned. They've had a few cycles. They don't look like they did before. So they go into their doctor and they go, oh, hey, like my period is heavier and it doesn't look like it did before. And they go, oh, you had a kid. Like that's normal now. No, like we don't talk about what a standard healthy cycle is supposed to look like. So let's just put that definition out there for the purposes of this conversation, because if you look at Dr. Google, you're going to see that luteal phases can be 13 to 17 days long. You're going to see that cycles can be anywhere from 24 to 35 days, depending on the
Oh my gosh.
right, depending on the source that you're looking at. But if you look at it from a traditional Chinese medicine lens, you should have a 28 to 30-day cycle because the lunar month is 29 and a half days. This is why we get leap year every 4 years, guys. So your cycle, if it is arriving anywhere between cycle day 28 and 30, you're on time. And there can be a little bit of fluctuation between 28 and 30, but it's not going to be big. And the thing that makes it fluctuate is actually where you ovulate. And that's a conversation for like stress. And when Dr. Andrew was talking about how lovely steaming is to go into the parasympathetic, like when we say on screech mode and we're stuck in the sympathetic all the time, our body thinks we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. And it can't tell the difference between the actual tiger and 100 unanswered emails in our inbox. It generates the same response in our body. And our body goes, I have to get away from the tiger. That will affect whether you ovulate and when you ovulate. Because if the body doesn't deem it safe enough for procreation to happen, whether that's your goal or not, it's not going to allow you to get pregnant because it doesn't think your body is in a safe enough place for that.
Gosh, shout it from the rooftops. Shout it from the rooftops. Like, just to have that piece of information, can you imagine as like a young girl having that knowledge, just that very basic statement that you just made, like that would just lend itself to being able for them to gather so much information. So if things change or things don't really look like that, they could then talk to their parent, their significant other, the special person in their life, their safe place person, and be like, I know that it could be like this, but it's not. And who do I need to talk to about this? Like, because I'm having these symptoms or I'm having these issues or these concerns. And it's, imagine starting that conversation about our bodies that young at that basic of a level and then not feeling shame around that. Like what that would change for women going forward, how we would change that, that line of, I guess, that lineage or whatever, but just changing the conversation would be so incredible. So
I love that because I say all the time that it's totally possible to have an entire generation of young women that don't know what period cramps are if we were only taught how to take care of our body from the beginning. So it's like just knowing that your cycle should be 28 to 30 days. I'm going to totally poke at today's current fashion trends, and all of your mid-rip shirts create period problems, folks. So when your abdomen is not staying warm, it affects the circulation in the lower part of your body. And one of my clients sent me a link for a postpartum nursing cami that is a crop top. And I was like, oh, for the love of Pete, the things that people don't know about their bodies. We need to stay warm. Blood likes to flow with more ease when we're not creating a hard environment for it to move in. When your body is fighting to stay warm and it's trying to bleed at the same time, you're putting extra strain on your body. You're literally creating more fatigue in your system because your body's working harder to do this thing.
okay.
Your period, not only is it supposed to arrive every 28 to 30 days, but it's supposed to be symptom free. And I know that there's people scoffing while I say that out loud. So I'm going to say it again. You're actually not supposed to really feel much of anything. No cramps, no brown blood, no moodiness going into it, no feeling like a fire-breathing dragon or having super short patience. You're not supposed to have any clots. It just quietly arrives. You get a little heavier day 2, 3, coming down to cruise to the finish line day 4 to the end. Your bleed should only be 4 to 6 days. If it is shorter than 4 days, it's telling a story about where your body's asking for more help. If it's longer than 6 days, your body is also telling a story about how it needs more help. So that's what we're shooting for, everybody. A symptom-free cycle. And I know, like, I was the biggest skeptic on the planet as somebody with stage 4 endo and fertility challenges and being told by a doctor from the time I was like 15 years old that I'd never be able to have children. At the time of this recording, I have an almost 13-year-old perfect little human in the other room here, and I am a 40-year-old natural conception woman. Like, it's possible. This is totally possible
Yeah.
if our bodies are cared for right.
And that's the thing is that's the cared for, right? That's like the nail on the head there. It's, like maybe you never steam. And even though I tell everybody you should totally steam, imagine if you could just tweak some things in your diet, tweak some things in your lifestyle, maybe add an herb or two. And even just those basic pieces are going to be huge going down the road. Then you add in steaming and you like change the whole game. But it's just about reaching out to those people to have those conversations and feeling comfortable around them because we've talked about it so many times, the shame around bleeding. Like hide the bleeding. Don't let them know that you're bleeding. Like don't talk about it too much. Don't talk about how you're feeling about it. It's just something we accept that women do and we don't talk about it. It's kind of like when you get into a relationship in the beginning, nobody's farting, and then all of a sudden you feel comfortable and you let it go. But it's like we never get to that comfortable portion in the relationship. So there's no real conversation about it. And that's where I think, I wish our mothers had that education and where I'm so glad I have it, but I'm 42 now. Like I was 39 when I started, 38, 39 when I started working with you. And it took me that long. And I knew some before I got to you because I'd been thrown into my holistic world. And so I had some information, but I didn't have all the pieces until I was like 38 or 39. Like, that's wild. I'm almost going into a portion of my life where I won't be bleeding anymore. And I just figured it out. And it changes sometimes. It still changes for me. I still reach out to you a couple of months, I'm like, oh, something's changed. Like, what's going on? And you dig to the questions and then you're like, oh, okay, there's the missing piece. So let's take that out and add this in. Quick. And it's so nice. But again, I was 38, 39 when I got that information, which is like, what? What is happening?
I have so many people that once they've sat down for that initial intake with me, they finish the appointment going, where were you when I was in my 20s? Man, my whole life would have been different if I had known this information earlier. Like, I feel the same way. Like, I became the resource that I couldn't find. And I will never forget when I learned that birth control can actually change how your partner smells to you. And that you tend to biochemically choose brother and not other. And all of a sudden, it clicked. Some of the relationship choices I would have made differently. I'm like, and that is why that happened. Wow.
Yeah.
Because my ability to smell my partner was literally changed by medication that I had been on to quote unquote regulate my cycle because I was having so much difficulty with the expression of it.
Yeah.
I would have never had to go on birth control if I had known this information from the beginning. The clients that I have, I have this little period mini care course on my website because just making some tweaks in terms of how you care for yourself and what you eat during your bleeding days totally sets up your whole month to happen differently. You have more energy, you get sick less. You have fewer symptoms with your next period. Like, it's really wild. Like, just taking a couple of extra meaningful steps during your bleeding days, covering your midriff, wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the people who wear shirts that are a little short. I did a TikTok about it a little while ago, and I was being totally sassy, but I was like, where's the rest of my shirt? I got more comments on that particular video because I was talking about how I would wear a long line tank top underneath a crop sweatshirt because the shirt wasn't long enough. And it wasn't covering my torso. And then what that meant in terms of, having there be clots and having there be cramps appear when the cycle started. And so you're totally right. Little tiny dietary and lifestyle changes without steaming, acutonics, herbs, anything else brought into the picture. Just those few lifestyle changes change everything.
Yep. Yeah. Just accepting that what you're doing isn't working. Like, that's really hard for us as women because I haven't met a woman yet, and maybe I will, but we want to be in control. So we think that what we're doing is generally the correct thing to be doing. And this is just how our cycle is going to be. It's going to be terrible. I'm going to get cramps that are going to make me pass out, like in the cafeteria in front of everybody. True story. And I'm going to have heavy cycles that are going to last 7 to 8 days. And this is just who I am. This is just going to be my story that I get to tell. And imagine if that wasn't your story, or you just didn't pass that story on to your daughter and your next bleeding person, because that's what I hear a lot of is women talking about, well, my daughter, I had this, so she's going to have it too.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but she doesn't have to. There's education out there where that doesn't have to be her story as well. So let's have a conversation with Adrienne. Let's talk to some other practitioners because it doesn't have to continue on. We want more for these girls coming. I want more for my nieces. I want less pain for them, more enjoyment, able to do what they want to do. I was an athlete. I was a swimmer. I was a field hockey player. And I felt like I couldn't do those things during my cycle, or I had to push through it and just deal with it. If I was having a bad one. So just the world that could exist if we just changed the story for these girls coming through now. It'd be mind-blowing. It would just be so incredible. And we would probably disrupt a large Midol industry, but that would be fine with me.
It's true, though. Your stamina changes. So when you are an athlete, then you start with the negative self-talk. Well, I was able to do it a week ago. Why can't I hit that record now? I see this in my middle child all the time. She is very, very athletic. She's a very gifted athlete. And when it comes to being really close to her period, she gets angry at herself because she gets more breathless and her stamina isn't there. And she's like, I can totally run a 6:49 mile, Mom. And I don't understand why I can't right now, or why my knee hurts now. And I'm like, honey, you're within a couple days of your period starting. Just be gentle with yourself. It's okay. This is normal. Because if we normalize what's actually normal, there was this study in the UK that came out not all that long ago. They did a survey of 100 female athletes. It was a combination of rugby and soccer players. And they were finding that a lot of them, when they had their ACL tears, it was happening at a certain point in their cycle.
Interesting.
Right? Are you over 35 years old and starting to feel like something is shifting in your body? Maybe you've reached 40 and you're starting to look at your period and go, what is going on here? This isn't like it always was. Or maybe you're starting to feel a little bit of the hormonal weight gain, the emotional roller coaster, and so much more. These are all things that you'll see in the perimenopausal period, and we don't talk nearly enough about what's happening during perimenopause. Join me on April 17th from 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Coming into Second Spring. What is second spring? This is when we go through our perimenopausal and menopausal journey. And I want to make sure that you can address any of the negative symptoms as you're going through this phase and teach you what's actually going on inside of your body. The link to register is in the show notes. Join me on April 17th at 6 o'clock. There will be a recording circulated afterwards because this period of our life, we should thrive and not merely survive. And now back to the show. Our changing hormones, like we have a whole concert of hormones that rise and fall at different points throughout our month. Men, testosterone, even Stephen, they have a very similar hormone expression over a 24-hour period. They are more like the sun. They move in a 24-hour orbit, right? We are like the moon, and we move in a 28-day lunar cycle. And there's ups and downs in our energy level and hormone changes all throughout that time period.
Yep.
You're like at the peak of your athleticism around ovulation because when you ovulate, you get a burst of testosterone. But you're not a testosterone dominant human being. So your athletic performance is different. Your stamina is different. I can't tell you the number of weightlifting forums, and I try really not to be that guy that goes in there and I'm like, well, there's a reason for that. But there's always somebody in there that's going, oh, girls, pump me up today. I just don't have the motivation. And I'm the guy that chimes in and goes, what day of your cycle are you on? It's always cycle day 3. Always. Never fails. They're asking for help with their motivation. Cheer me on, pump me up because it is cycle day 3. You're the point where things are just starting to change.
Yeah.
SH level is just barely starting to rise. So yes, you felt like death for the last couple of days, but you haven't had a high enough surge in your hormones yet to actually be able to athletically perform where you want to be at yet.
Yeah.
And man, like the conversations we would hold inside of our heads would be totally different.
Yep. And that was one of the first things that I took from you because you were like, well, what do you do on the first day of your bleed? And I was like, I don't know. I live my life. Like I go out, like I do. I'm a business owner. Like I have a family. I have all these things. Like I have all these things I have to do. So I do what I would normally do. And you're like, no. If you can stay home, like don't just lay, like you were like, lay on the couch and be lazy. And I'm putting that in quotation marks for everybody else because it's not lazy. It's honoring your body. And you were like, your body needs rest at that time. That's why I was having all these crazy symptoms is because by nature, I'm a driver. I'm a pusher. I'm a constantly going kind of person. And that feels good to me. Like that is not something that always stresses me out, but we reach points we're doing all these things, then we're doing all these things for other people, and then we're doing all these things for everybody. And it's not just us and our families that we're doing things for, it's the world that we're doing things for now. And you were like, you've got to try and go inward on that first day. And that was a game changer for me because I stopped working out those first 2 or 3 days of my cycle because I was still going to the gym and trying to lift as much as I did before. I was trying to do their stair climber as much as I did before. I was trying to do as much hot yoga as I did before. And I felt like death. Like I felt like death. I threw my back out once when I was doing that. Like I couldn't move for 4 or 5 days. And it was because my body was already going through something. I put it into more fight or flight. My body's like, well, your body can only take so much of that before it puts you down without your permission. And it puts you down. So that was one of the biggest things I took from you was like, I know you probably can't stay home because you do run a business, but you need to do as little as possible on those first 3 days. And that has been a game changer for me because I know when I don't listen to that advice, I come into you and I'm like, I did it to myself. I know exactly what happened. I take full responsibility for my actions. So that was a huge piece of advice for me.
Well, and as a business owner myself, like I learned to plan my work around my cycle so that I could show up the best way possible in everything that I was doing. So I schedule my schedule a little bit lighter on the first few days of my period, and I take a nap at lunch. because I know that my body needs to conserve resources. Like, am I still working? Yes. I'm sure there are people out there that are in W-2 jobs going, but I don't have that luxury. I don't own my own business. And my challenge to you is find ways that you can still conserve energy. Maybe this is a 20-minute nap at lunch instead of working through your lunch. That's a topic I should do as a podcast in and of itself. But, maybe you take a 20-minute nap at lunch in your car, or maybe instead of pushing to lift that laundry basket and put that 5 loads of laundry through the machine while you're bleeding, you do it before that, or the basket sits there and waits until you're done, right? Maybe you're making just different choices like, no, I'm not going to schedule going out with friends. I'm going to go to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock for the next 2 or 3 days so that I can get 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And I'm allowing myself that time to sleep and not getting myself up as early because I'm not trying to push myself through that workout. Like, it's still good to walk and do gentle exercise. Yin yoga, move your body, qigong, go for a walk. Just, you want to exercise to energize. So we're talking gentle activities, because when you do too much, it's exactly like you said, you feel like death because you've literally pulled all the resources out of the tank and then some. And then it takes that much longer to recover afterwards. So it does take you longer to get back to that record weightlifting number, or, fill in the blank. It just takes you longer to reintegrate into life. When I used to kickbox, I discovered menstrual cups because I was tired of bleeding through tampons when I was boxing on my period. Like, I do these things and I say these things because I've lived these things, right? Like, I know what it looks like. And as I look back at my time as a competitive martial artist, I was like, of course, there's a correlation between the matches I won and the matches I didn't. Because if it was scheduled too close to my cycle, like, wow, was I a dummy for taking that particular match? Like, that was not smart, but I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Because like you said, like, there are people who obviously don't own their businesses and don't have as much flexibility in that. And then there's people like me who like drive through every lunch and do all this stuff.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's not about taking a full day off. I mean, if you could, great, like amazing. But we also exist in a world where it's a constant moving cycle. So you find those periods of respite. You find that 10 or 15 minutes in your car on your lunch break or on another break you may have to like relax and breathe and let your body just kind of calm down a little bit. You don't go out at night, or you don't go to the gym in the morning before you go to work, or you just take those extra time, or you just, if you can't do any of that resting, I mean, I'm sure you'd agree, like, you just watch what you're eating. Like, watch are you taking in enough water? Are you supporting yourself nutritionally during that time? Just finding those small ways to support yourself in those first 3 days is so huge, because it comes up every patient I know, myself, yourself, anybody I talk to about this. If you're not supported in those first 3 days, the rest of your period is longer.
Yep.
It's heavier. It's more painful. It's more crampy. And then your next cycle, and I think you would agree, is going to be disrupted as well. Like, you're going to have there's things you can do if you work with somebody like Adrian, where you can like kind of correct that and do that. But if you constantly are not taking time for yourself, you're going to constantly have the same result. So,
well, and that hole gets deeper. So like the hole gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And so, we try to push through. We try to, okay, if we're going to go back to W-2 related work, the work day is designed around a 24-hour hormone cycle. It's not at all geared for how 28-day hormone cyclers are wired. It's just not. And I created a course called Cycle Productivity Secrets because you can actually maximize your productivity based on where you are in your cycle and the gifts that each phase gives you. Like, we've never been taught to look at our cycle as, what do you mean it gives me gifts? It gives me problems for like so many days, and then I'm thankful to be over it, right? Not even thinking about the fact that, like, if you want your best headshot, go do it during ovulation because your face is more symmetrical. Your skin is literally glowing because your body's trying to attract a mate. Like, whether that's your social goal or not, that doesn't matter. Biochemically, your body's like, hey, come on, right? We're more extroverted. We network better, right? Every single little piece of our cycle gives us gifts and enhances our capabilities to do certain things. We haven't been taught to look at it like an ally.
Yep. We're taught to fear it. Yeah.
Yes.
You're supposed to be scared of it. You're supposed to be mad at it. So then you're mad at your body and you're telling your body horrible things like, I hate this period. I feel so awful. Why does my body do this to me? Like, The Body Keeps the Score. Great book. But like, so the body keeps the score. Like, it hears those things. And if you perpetually are saying these awful things about your body, it's only going to do awful things and you're only going to feel more awful. And that doesn't mean like, and maybe your period's not going to be the pleasure cruise that you think it's going to be. Maybe you will feel a little bit of, fatigue or a little, but honoring that versus being angry at it is such a different way to look at it. So I totally agree with you.
Oh, I love that you brought that up. I did an episode earlier in season 3 about the inner critic and how nasty that voice can be to us sometimes. And a lot of times it convinces us that our body is subpar in some way and isn't showing up or is betraying us in some way. And we're locked inside of our head with that voice.
Yeah.
That's the one we hear the loudest. That's the one we hear the most, no matter what anyone else in your life says to you or about you. The one that you live with inside of your head is the strongest influencing factor, which is why gratitude practices are so powerful in terms of rewiring your brain.
Yeah.
The inner critic is the same thing, just in the opposite direction. And we've made it socially acceptable to talk shit to ourselves.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
yes, exactly. We're like, that's totally fine that you tell, like, screw this. I hate my period. I hate everything. And why is my body doing this? And why am I so fat? And why am I gaining weight this way? And why? It's because of my hormones, and my stupid hormones are doing this. And it's just like, oh my gosh. Like, I talk a lot in my practice about my patients. Like, I always say, how are you feeling in your brain and your body? How are you feeling in your system right now? How's your system showing up for you? I don't ever really ask in my office, like, where's your pain today? And that doesn't mean I'm not acknowledging that they may have pain, that they may be experiencing some really intense things at that time. But it's like, let's just start the adjustment period by changing the conversation. And when people are talking about things, I'm like, okay, so we have some opportunities for healing here when we're talking about pain or symptoms that are coming up. Acknowledging that things aren't quite how we want them to be or are really outside of how we want them to be, but then changing the language around them. And you can see people's brain and body just kind of shift and be like, oh, I kind of like that. And it becomes a more gentle period of time that we spend together during our adjustments. And so I think when we look at that, like you said, we look at the body, like that negative self-talk or that negative feeling about anything that goes outside of what we think is the norm of our body is bad. And it's like, it very much may be. I am not discounting that. Like, I'm not discounting feeling awful, sad, stressed, anxiety. Like, I have been there. But imagine if we could just change it a little bit, even 50% of the time, if you could change that language around it, like what that would do for your mind and your body. It would be amazing. Yeah.
One of the things that I love that you say when your clients come in is, so what's going really well for you? Like, I love that because like people usually come in like, oh, you're going to fix these problems that I'm having. Right.
Yeah.
And, some of it is changing how we feel about symptoms too, because we see them as problems that disrupt our life. But if we flip the script and we look at it more like how this is my body's only language to communicate with me in.
Yeah.
And these symptoms are my body's way of waving a white flag and going, Houston, problem here, please help.
Yeah.
It really changes the frame.
Yep.
Because again, it doesn't feel like your body's retaliating in some way against you. It's
Mhm.
just trying to lovingly communicate with you because its job is to keep you alive.
Yeah. Like we say this both, I think, like your body will knock at the door for only so long.
Mhm.
Like it will gently knock and then it will pound and then somebody will kick in the door. And so imagine if we just listened to it when it was started gently knocking and we didn't just, as women, ignore it because we have to do a million other things, or even men and women, if we just really listened to ourselves and didn't just ignore it. And that doesn't mean you have to run to the practitioner every time something, but it means you can have a conversation with people. Like, I've been experiencing this. Have you ever noticed anything? Like having a conversation about it and having that be okay and a safe thing to do. If we had those before somebody kicked in our door and we got some insane diagnosis that we had to then deal with, it would change the face of healthcare.
Oh, totally. And the things that we'd be able to do in a shorter period of time.
Hmm.
Because, like, usually by the time we get to that door kicking in point,
Hmm.
like, the symptoms are pretty darn extreme. And in order to truly heal them at the root level, which from a TCM standpoint, it's a root and branch theory concept, right? Like if you heal the roots of the plant, the rest of the plant is going to flourish and the symptoms are going to go away, right?
Yeah.
So with that idea in mind, like you're looking at the symptom as something that is pointing in the roadmap to where the problem actually lies in the body.
Hmm.
And, if we're taught to address that when it first begins happening,
Hmm.
it's a totally different experience because usually by the time people reach me, like you had said, I had been meaning to reach out to you for a year. I'm pretty sure that's like the average turn time for people. They're like, I heard about you a year ago. And like the symptoms just got to a point where like now I was like, I really need to talk to Adrian now. I
Hmm.
hear that often. And some of it's because like I work outside of what people know. Right. And so there's a little bit of an educational aspect to things. But, imagine how much quicker the body will shift if you catch it when it's starting to knock
Yeah.
and not when somebody's kicking in the door. Because usually by the time they get to me, especially people on the fertility journey, man, and they're like,
Oh,
oh, like I've been trying to have a baby. I wanted to have a baby several years ago. They don't want to stop trying to do
yeah.
the healing that they need to do in order to be able to really achieve the healthy pregnancy that they're looking for. And it breaks my heart every single time because
Hmm.
that's one of the hardest conversations that I have is like, well, you're having these symptoms and you have these hurdles in your fertility journey because of X, Y, or Z. And it's
Hmm.
going to take us a little bit of time to unravel the knots. Will we get you to your goal? Absolutely. Can we get there? Sure. But it's going to take us a little bit of time to go on that journey together.
Yeah.
And by the time people find me, they're usually desperate for an outcome. Either their periods are just so disruptive that it's taking them out of their lives and they're on the verge of feeling like a hysterectomy is the only way out because they just don't know what else to do because they're depleted and they're tired, oftentimes because they've been bleeding a ton.
Yeah.
And they're desperate. And so when
And
I say something like it's going to take a couple of months, they look at me like I've got 5 heads because they're like, I can't wait that long.
they're like, I donated the last 5 years of my life to figuring this out. I'm coming to you as a and that's what's hard sometimes, I guess, as practitioners, and we can share
Yeah.
that here, is that when we see people on that last, like we're the last thing they're going to do before something larger happens.
Yeah.
And it's with something larger, either surgery or another intervention of some kind. But like it's an incredible responsibility. And I'm so blessed and feel so blessed to be able like to serve people in that way. And I'm sure you do too. But it's so hard because I want to just say, like, I will adjust you once and you will be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But I know that that's not going to happen. Like, I know that this has been going on for so long. And there's been so much intervention before you came to me that I have to unravel, sometimes unravel the intervention, sometimes unravel the problem itself. And it can take time. And I'm sure you feel that way too, because you're like,
Yeah.
I would love to sit you on this steamer. I would love to give you these herbs. And next week, like
Mm-hmm.
your periods are normal and you're pregnant. Like I would love all of those things to happen. It would be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, the body, it takes to get into a situation and it takes time to get out of a situation. And it's that patience piece that we have to ask for from people, which I hate asking for
Yeah.
from them sometimes because I want it to be so fast for them. And it's always generally faster than I think it's going to be, which is always good. But it's also that piece of patience that we need from them in their healing journey. And it's actually part of them healing. It's finding that piece.
Oh, absolutely. I want to say it was the second episode in season 3. It was called Holistic Fix is not an Amazon Prime kind of fix. And it's really true because like we live in this on-demand kind of society where we expect, just like our Amazon Prime packages, they need to arrive tomorrow. And because of the culture that we're saturated in, that wait time is really hard. That patience piece is really hard. And some of it's our culture, some of it's how we've been raised, some of it's that we've been living with the symptoms for so long that like our patience is exhausted and we're at the end of our rope.
Yeah.
And, I think about what brought me to Chinese medicine in the first place. Like I was bleeding. I had been through all of the tools that Western medicine had in their toolkit, and nobody could get this bleed to stop. And acupuncture could, and herbs could. And I went, what is this magic? I must know all the things. Right. Because I was so fascinated by how something so simple had such a huge life-changing experience for me. And the more I dug into the literature, the more I found the wisdom in this several thousand-year-old form of medicine. And I'm like, this just feels like home to me. So when you were talking at the beginning about the spleen this and the kidney this, and I don't understand why these things are all affecting this right now, I'll jokingly tell people when I talk to them that like a lot of Chinese medicine sounds like a weather report, right? Things are too damp or too dry or too hot or too cold, right? But I think that's what made it make sense for me because it was something that I could look out the window and I could see that mirror of what was going on inside of my body and understand it through that lens. And so, a big part of what I do is try to educate people about what's going on inside their body. That's why this whole program is offering period solutions for a symptom-free life. Like, you really can have that. And basic body literacy is the first step.
100%. Like I am so thankful that I found you and that I have you to refer to with these things. And the fact that you are also a practitioner who you recognize when you may have met your wall with a client as well. And I only refer to people that subscribe to that kind of philosophy where like they're going to do what they need to do within the education and the knowledge that they have. And if it's not working, they're going to find somebody else to help that patient. And so it's about patient care. It's about patient support, not about the practitioner. So if you go to a practitioner who is unwilling to refer you out for something you're concerned about, you should walk out of that office and never go back. And so that's why I so much appreciate that I have you to do these referrals with these patients where it's, I know enough now, but you are the expert and I want them to hear it from you. So.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I feel the same way. I'll suggest to people to get other perspectives on things, or I'll ask them because like I get asked for chiropractic referrals and I'll ask them like, what has your experience been with it in the past? And some people are straight up terrified of manual adjustments. And so I'm like, well, okay, so there's this style and and I try to fit them with the personality of a practitioner that is going to resonate with them and a style of care that is going to feel safe for them. It's one of the reasons I brought acutonics into my practice, because there were so many people that I'd be like, you really need to go see an acupuncturist for this. And they were just terrified by the idea of needles. And this way, like, I was able to meet them in that space of, well, here's a non-invasive way of getting the same benefits. So, being able to meet people where they're at in their journey and provide them with the tools, like, part of being a holistic practitioner is knowing where your expertise has gotten them to a point, but they need something else to, like, help them carry the ball across the finish line.
Yeah. Yep. I totally agree with you.
So I feel like I could have this conversation with you for a very long
We could talk for like 4 or 5 hours.
And Dr. Andrea will totally be back. We have lots of cool topics to talk about. But if people are looking for you, how can they find you?
So my website is synapticdc.com. And my office is in Westbrook, Maine, which is just outside of Portland, Maine. I do have 1 day a week where I see patients in Dover, New Hampshire. So I am in that location just 1 day a week, though. And so if they want to reach me, my phone number is 207-591-0384. They can call the office and just schedule a time to speak with me and maybe come in and see the office.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Andrea, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist and acutonics practitioner, herbalist, and Chinese nutritional therapist, Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like and follow us at MoonEssenceMe on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.